Hi, and welcome to the Grove Podcast. I'm Matt Badiali, your host. In these episodes, we try and bring you companies and people and discussions that we at Mangrove Investor feel are important. These are the parts of the business world that maybe you don't see every day. So we try and highlight nonprofits, private companies, and even some public companies, and show you the good that they're doing. So sit back and enjoy this episode, and thanks very much for listening. Hi, and welcome to the Grove Pod. I am Matt Badiali, your host. I hope you guys are having a great week. We're going to kick the Grove Podcast series off with a story about greenwashing. And this comes from the Wall Street Journal. I'll put a link to the essay below. Hey, before I get into this too far, though, it's the first one of these. We think this is a really important topic. I'd love to get, a like. I'd love to get you to subscribe to the pod so you don't miss any of these. And comments, because we're wide open right now. Lots of ideas swirling around, but I'd love to know what you'd like to hear about on the topics of sustainable investing. So, all right, without further ado, let's jump into the Wall Street Journal article, and I'll put a link to this below. Like I said, the headline reads, U.S. authorities are probing Deutsche Bank's DWS over sustainability claims. And basically, a Deutsche Bank whistleblower came to the SEC and said, hey, all these funds that Deutsche Bank is selling with a sustainability wrapper, they're all a load of crap. And I found this to be really interesting because they must have been fairly egregious if the SEC is going after them for this label. And the reason I say that is sustainability is a difficult thing to quantify, right? It's easy to do a fund around a sector, right? Because if a company makes steel and you want a steel-related fund, that's easy, right? But sustainability practices are a lot harder to put numbers on, and so it's much harder to put them in a fund. And so for this to be a federal case, as it were, about a giant investment bank that's not doing the right thing when it comes to sustainability, this must be pretty egregious, must be pretty bad. So we're going to wait and see how this case turns out. But this is called greenwashing, and I've written about this before, and I'll put a link to the latest essay that we wrote on greenwashing in the notes as well. Greenwashing is basically when you take a company that has really nothing to do, no sustainable practices, but you maybe drop them into a fund that's called a sustainable fund. Then suddenly this company becomes acceptable to investors. They buy the fund invests in the individual company, and now you have money that was earmarked for sustainable companies going into the shares of a company that has nothing to do with it. And we see this all the time, especially in some of these, the ETFs that are really being marketed heavily as sustainable ETFs. What you find is, they'll have 150 companies, 175 companies in the fund. And as you go through them, you'll come across some that are like, I'm not sure that this giant oil company with a legacy of oil spills and broken pipelines and explosions really belongs in a sustainability fund. And also what you'll see is some of these funds are they're just like a NASDAQ 100 in a sustainability wrapper. You can almost go one for one, company to company. What are the top companies in the NASDAQ? What are the top companies in this sustainability fund? And that's a head scratcher. You're like, do all these companies really do so well? And the answer is no. But look, the big banks are in it for the money. That's what they're there for, right? And there are literally trillions of dollars moving into the sustainability space all around the world. And so when you want to capture like endowments from some of the major universities or some of the giant nonprofits, they're all looking for investments, and they all want to get out of fossil fuels. So this money that was in fossil fuels has to go somewhere. These marketers at the big investment banks are like, well, why don't we just make a sustainability fund? And they go to Jimmy in research and they say, Jimmy, give me a sustainability fund. And Jimmy says, well, what are your criteria? And the marketer says, I don't care. Just give me the sustainability fund so that I can sell it and make my commission. And in this case, in Deutsche Bank's case, what's alleged is that Jimmy didn't do anything. And so, or maybe the marketing oversold what Jimmy was actually able to do. And that's a problem. And it's rampant in the industry right now because there's an awful lot of money rolling around in this sector. And when you have this kind of hot money and you have people who are guiding that money into investments, not doing a good job with due diligence, you have marketers that really just want the sale. You know what I mean? And so for us, like if it matters to you how you invest your money, be very careful about these exchange traded funds or these big funds that are being offered, whether you're a family office and you're doing specific funds through an investment bank, or if you're an individual investor buying ETFs. Really do your homework because there's a lot of, let's not say fraud, let's just say bending the definition or really stretching the definition of sustainability till it screams. And in this case, that's really the premise behind what we're doing here at the Grove and what we're doing with Mangrove Investor. And that is there's a lot more research that needs to be done, and we want to do it, and we want to do it for you. And so in this case, what I'd like to do is find individual companies that we can hold up from a financial analysis point of view and say, this stock is going to go up in value, we believe, and based on X, Y, and Z criteria. Oh, and here's the sustainable aspect of it. You know, here's the part where they do good, and we have to figure out what is the good that they're doing. Maybe they've done a great job of hiring folks for their board of directors or their management team, where instead of, and this is so common, I see this all the time. Hey, we're looking for a director. I went to school with Jim. He's a good guy. He'd be a great fit. Or hey, I went out with Kevin and had drinks the other night. He's available. Oh, we have a board seat open. You think I'm kidding, but I'm not. And so that's how come you get these homogenized boards, and actually you're not hiring the best people for governance. You're just it's who you know, not necessarily what you know, right? And so when you go out and you have a diverse board and you actually have to go out and look for these candidates, it costs you money, it costs you time. And so the companies that are doing that are actually doing it the right way, and they're getting the best candidates. The other thing that you see often is how do you quantify social engagement? Like, is it the amount of money that one of these companies donates in a year? Is it an actual engagement? Do they have do they hire someone to do social engagement with the people that they're impacting, or do they have actually a person on staff whose job is the social side of things? I've seen some really, really good companies at this. Rayonier comes to mind. Rayonier is a big. They basically grow pine trees like corn, and they get a bad rap from a social side or from an environmental side because they plant these acres and acres and acres of monoculture pine trees. They cut them down and they ship them to mills, and they turn it into all kinds of stuff. Everything from the absorbent material in baby diapers to toilet paper, right? If you think about a company that cuts down trees, it's immediately a bad company in a lot of people's minds, right? But in this case, it's basically slow corn, and the land that they're growing these pine trees on really isn't going to be useful for much. In fact, the big knock on Rayonier, and you can't really blame them for this, is that a lot of this land that they were growing pine trees on is more valuable as housing now than it is growing pine trees. And so they've converted a lot of this stuff into housing developments. So it's even, from a land use point of view, they they're going the wrong way environmentally. But from a social point of view, they do a lot of work in the community. They don't just give money; they actually do a lot of work with scholarships, and they engage in the community. They give a lot of money. So, from that point of view, that's all right. They get a plus there. So you understand how hard it is to quantify this stuff. Like, how do you put a number value on a company that was growing pine trees and now they're building houses? How do you quantify that from a good or bad slider, right? Versus the work that they do in the community. So that's why a lot of these big investment banks are kind of sneaking companies into their ETFs, right? I can make a case for this. I can make a case for that. So at Mangrove Investor, what we're trying to do is do a deep dive in an individual company, right? And every month we'll do that. We'll give you a new investment idea. We'll go into the finances of the company. We'll do the investment criteria from a kind of a macro point of view, and we'll lay out what these companies are doing for the good and areas maybe where they could use a little more help. And the kind of cool thing is, your investment dollars are votes, whether you like that or not. When you go long a stock, when you buy shares of a company, you are doing a lot of things for that company, including allowing them to raise money when they need to at a higher share price, when you can get them put into certain indices, which elevates their brand. It raises the share price. So it does good for these companies. In fact, in a lot of cases, the share price is tied to compensation for management also, right? So as you buy these companies and you help push the share price up, there are kind of second and third order impacts on these companies that you should be aware of, right? So in that regard, we're taking a different approach to investing. To me, investing isn't about a poker game. And I'm never all in on one stock, right? That's gambling. I got to put a couple kids through college. I'm in this for the long haul, and I'm interested in finding companies that are in the right place in a long-term trend, meet our sustainable or our for the good criteria, and there's no BS, right? I don't want greenwashing. I want to look these people in the eye and know that when they tell me what they're doing, I can believe them. Trust, but verify. And that gets all the way back to these giant investment banks and what they're doing. Just be very, very careful, and we'll follow this Deutsche Bank story. And I suspect, as with any story where you turn the lights on and you see a cockroach, there's never just one cockroach. So I expect to see a lot more of this coming out. So with that, thanks very much for watching. I'm Matt Badiali. This was the very first Grove Pod. Well, look at that. You made it to the end. Thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and we're going to have a lot more coming. You need to sign up and become part of the Grove. Give us your email address, and we'll make sure you're notified anytime there's a new podcast coming down the pike. Have a great day.